Hello and welcome to the Success Showcase. I'm your host, Eric Lopkin from the Modern Observer Group. And with me, as always, is Chip Janiszewski from the Happiness and Success GPS. Chip, how you doing this week?
Doing great. How about you, Eric?
Doing fantastic. We're getting into the holiday season.
Yeah, Christmas 2 weeks from tomorrow.
Yeah,
Everybody better go out and get their stuff. It's crazy.
and wrapping up the year. So, a few weeks ago, we talked about business plans. And when we did, we very briefly mentioned a type of plan called the lean business plan that the Small Business Association has templates for. Well, this business plan is based on the book, The Lean Startup. So we figured for this episode of the Success Showcase Book Club, we're going to go through the Lean Startup, talk about its concepts, and see where people can apply them.
Yeah, it actually came from lean manufacturing to begin with. And whereas lean manufacturing has things such as smaller batch sizes and this and that, whatever, what this does is it teaches you how to start up a business, monitoring things with smaller batches and acting a whole lot quicker, smaller steps, and so on and so forth, instead of taking a long time to plan and then taking a long time to do things and so on and so forth. It's a really, really good approach. And it guides you through this because it is a lot of work and it is a lot of instant action and so on and so forth, but in an organized fashion. So I really enjoyed reading this. And you had mentioned that you read it like 6, 7 years ago when it first came out, and to prepare for this, you went back to it, and you said you didn't realize it until now. You actually started a business using that philosophy without even knowing it.
I did. One of the businesses I run is called Support Info Go. And when I launched it, I did not realize I was using the lean startup method. But it had sort of gotten ingrained into the back of my head and popped up when I started this new business. And it really was the best way for this particular business to start because we were able to jump in and literally go from concept to launch in 6 weeks. So we're talking very, very tight timetable. And one of the things that people might misunderstand is, lean startup talks about doing all this without all the excessive planning. But that doesn't mean that you're just jumping in and doing it. There's still a lot of work in the background that goes on. The difference is how you're doing it and what you're aiming at. Because in a traditional business, what you're aiming at is that profit goal. And for a startup, that profit goal is pretty far down the line. In a lean startup, you're jumping in, and what you're doing is experimenting with your product or service. So you're starting with small batches of customers, small products, figuring out with those customers what works and what doesn't, and taking those lessons and then applying it to growing the product. And
One of the things about it is that it starts with, instead of having a finished product, it starts with something that they call an MVP, which is not most valuable player, but it's a minimum viable product. It's something you just start with that you can build off of. And they use concepts called validated learning. And in my notes here, it says the unit of progress for lean startups is a validated learning, a rigorous method for demonstrating progress when one is embedded in the soil of extreme uncertainty. The bottom line is you don't know what's going to happen until you get going with it. And as you mentioned, a lot of businesses start with profits in mind, but the most important thing is, who is your customer? What do they want? What are they going to pay for? And that's what it's all about. And if you are not addressing that, it's a license for failure. So what this is all about, it has certain principles, saying that entrepreneurs are everywhere. You don't have to work in a garage to be in a startup, but it also talks about entrepreneurship being management. So it's not just ideas, but it's management. And it talks about a quantification process, the validated learning, called innovative accounting, which is a brand new method of analyzing what's going on rather than the numbers, and then pivoting or re- refreshing what you're doing and so on, that kind of thing. So there's a lot of different principles, all of which have to be acted upon quick. But the bottom line is you got to start with something minimum. You got to learn from what you're doing, measure the results, and you got to be able to shift on the fly or say, hey, this is a good one. Let's keep this going. And those concepts are really, really neat.
Right. And what I really loved about it is that all of these concepts start with the scientific method. So it gives you that methodology to follow. And for those of you who are a long time out of high school chemistry, the scientific method starts with form a hypothesis. Then you create an experiment to test that hypothesis, draw a conclusion. Was the hypothesis right or not? And then it starts all over again with the next steps. So you're almost
Measure,
forced.
learn.
You're almost what?
Yeah, they talk about continuous innovation. It's the build, measure, learn process, and they have a
Yes.
diagram that has a circle around that. The build, measure, learn is on the outside, and then on the inside you have your code, you have your data, you have your experiences, and all these different things. But it's an ongoing process. But if you really think about that, build, measure, learn. It's do something, measure what's going on, and then learning from it, and just keep the process going.
Right. And to give you an example from the business I built using Lean Startup, what Support Info Go does is it creates web and email based calendars to connect people with medical disabilities and medical conditions to support groups, educational presentations, things like that. Well, the first thing we had to do was figure out if there was an audience for this. So rather than going full blown with a whole bunch of different conditions and having events everywhere, we did a very small test. We did just for multiple sclerosis and just in the state of Connecticut. And we gauged what kind of response we got. The response we got told us we were definitely on the right path. So we expanded out to all of New England. And we took the data from that and kept expanding based on the data. We were able to figure out the best ways to list the events, the best ways to get the events to people, whether it was on a website, through emails. But we did it small first and then took those lessons to go out.
Yeah, so you actually went through the process it talks about here. It's not the question of whether the product can be built, because there's a lot of things that get built that nobody's interested in. But the question, especially in your case, is should this product be built? It was a whole new concept of providing this information for events going on and so on and so forth. And you tested it small and answered the question whether you could build a sustainable business around that set of products and services, because you took one and now you have several different initiatives going based upon the same concept. And I'm sure that you saw what this possibly could grow into, but it grew into something that's huge very, very quickly. And it's kudos to you and Ray, who we definitely have to get on sometime to talk about.
Yes, we do.
But it's just kudos to the two of you for getting this thing going. It's amazing. And what this does is it provides resources for all different types of diseases and problems that people have. In this case, it started with multiple sclerosis, but you have things going for cancer and a lot of other different things. And it's just providing resources, meetings that are going on, ways for people to post stuff in a very, very organized fashion. And it's fantastic. And now Ray's planning on going on a bus to market this throughout the country.
Yes, it's turned into a huge business. But using the lean startup method gave us a huge advantage in that because we started it small, we didn't need so many resources up front. So we were able to build what we needed as a proof of concept, see if people actually wanted to use it, and then build it out little by little, again, testing all along the way. If we had done this in a more traditional method where we designed the entire product and put together the best possible product we can and get it all out and launch it big, it would have cost a fortune, and we probably wouldn't have been able to do it. This alternate method of launching really gave us a much better idea of what was needed, and also a way to do it with limited resources.
Yeah, so taking a look at this, I mean, if you're building a business, it normally does start out with a vision and then a strategy to build something and then the product. But what this talks about, it's understanding what aspects of the products and strategies are functioning well, which are failing. It's going through the learning curve in the middle. So if you take a look at a triangle going from the bottom, which is the vision, and then the strategy, and then the products, that's basically the way most businesses work. However, when you do the strategy and you're doing the learning thing and seeing how things are working or not, if they're working well, great, move ahead. If they're not, you have to do something called a pivot, which is getting together with the meeting and figuring out what you need to change to make this thing work. And once you get to the final product, then you just optimize it and make it work. And the book talks about delivery methods and so on and so forth, and analyzing things as far as what's the best way to reach your clients. And one of the things it talks about is using your clients' feedback to do that. But it's a constant learning process. So there's a quote here that says, if the fundamental goal of entrepreneurship is to engage in organization building under conditions of extreme uncertainty, its most vital function is learning.
Right. And it's so important to get that information, because when you're starting with your idea, you're starting in a vacuum. And Eric Ries, who's the author of the book, gives a fantastic example in his own business that he was working on called InView. Now, InView had developed this avatar based instant messaging system where you could create a little 3D image that was representative of you. You could outfit it, you could get it little items, and then you could go talk to people. Well, their idea was that this would be a way for people to talk with their friends. When they started putting customers on, they found out their customers didn't want to use it to talk to their friends. They liked the product, but they thought it was a great way to meet new people rather than talk to folks they already knew. So instead of an add on to an instant messenger that you would just talk to your friends and have this little 3D interface, they ended up building more of a community where people could meet for the first time. So the product itself needed to pivot and they had to make changes to it, but the purpose of the product was completely different from what they thought they were building.
Yeah, and that's where the learning experience and everything that you're doing is an experiment. And so the learning experience and quantifying is so important. Actually, at the end of the book, it talks about the paid engine of growth, and it says moving away from sustainable organic growth. Reese explains that the paying component, this final engine, is entirely reliant on spending money to gain customers. And the two ways of doing this is to, number one, ensure that each customer generates more revenue, like you talked about, customers bringing in others wanting to meet other people. And also, or if you're not going to be getting a whole lot of new customers, what you need to do is reduce the cost of gaining a new customer. So the bottom line is what they were talking about was what they thought this people were going to do as far as the way they like it. And it was actually 180-degree difference, as you explained. They wanted to meet new people rather than hang out with the people they know.
Yeah, it's so important to be able to speak with your customers and get the ideas that they're interested in and get their point of view on your product or service. But a simple focus group doesn't really do it. And you can't simply ask. I mean, Steve Jobs famously said, if he had asked people what they wanted in a phone, nobody would have said a touchscreen because nobody had seen it before, so they had no frame of reference. By the same token, Henry Ford said if I'd asked my customers what they wanted, they'd have said a faster horse because they didn't envision a car. Nobody envisioned a touch phone. So by putting together your MVP, now you've got something that they can visualize, something they can actually see and touch and work with. It's not going to have all the bells and whistles, it's just going to be very basic. But that puts the ideas in their head so that now they can see, oh, I can do XYZ with this. And
Yeah,
you might have thought they were going to do ABC.
yeah, and what you think, that's the important thing there is you're doing something that's very, very basic. It's a very, very small physical product or whatever you're doing made in the least amount of time with the least amount of effort. And what it allows you to do is get something out there as soon as possible so you can start learning and developing. It gets you into the process, it gets you to the build stage. But the bottom line is, if you put in all kinds of money to come out with a finished product and people don't like it, you've really, really hurt yourself. And what this does is it's a quick thing. And they call it, it's the testing process. And they used a few examples, including a zone. But the first thing that Dropbox, which is, your cloud backup system, the first thing they did was they just created a video to show future customers, which explained the value that they plan to provide and outline the problem they intended to solve. So without even building the system, they just put a video out there showing what was going to happen. Very, very simple to do, build a video as opposed to building a whole system to do what they're talking about doing. So, I mean, there's examples out there that they talk about. They talked about another one called Food on the Table, which is a grocery delivery service, beginning with just one customer and a chef who would manually purchase what the customer wanted and make what they're doing. And he grew that into a business based upon the feedback with one customer, two customers, and so on and so forth. But it's constantly testing, evaluating, pivoting when you have to pivot, and then getting back to work on it. That's what it's all about. In lean manufacturing, they talk about small batch sizes instead of doing large batch sizes. And the bottom line is by doing small batch sizes, he talked about Toyota being able to avoid having all kinds of quality problems with cars by not making big batches where one part may have been wrong and messed up the whole thing. Yes, it's more efficient as far as a cost standpoint to make a whole bunch of stuff at once, but is it really the most important thing? And is it going to get you the biggest bang for your buck? In most cases, you're going to lose money by not doing small batches because you're going to have problems with the big batches. You're always going to have a problem with things and you got to catch it quick. And the only way to do that is through a small batch.
All right. One of the examples he gives, he talks a lot about the fact that the planning that goes into it, people spend a lot of time planning. But when you break down what a startup has to do, all of that planning and strategizing really ends up being only 5% of what you have to do. So you need to find ways to quickly move into the other pieces. And one example he gives is Zappos, the online shoe store. And one of the problems they had right off was they had to figure out, did people actually want to buy shoes online? Or did they prefer going somewhere that they could actually try them on? Well, they could have built the entire Zappos store and tested the hypothesis, but that would have been very expensive. Instead, what they did was they built the front end of a store and made a deal with a local retailer that they took pictures of their inventory, posted it on the online store, and then when people ordered from Zappos, the folks at Zappos went to this local retailer, bought the shoes, and shipped it out. So they were able to determine if people actually wanted the product without investing in infrastructure and inventory. I mean, a retail business is very intensive. So to do it this way saved them millions of dollars. And if people had decided they didn't want to buy online, it would have bankrupted them had they done it the other way.
Yeah, so it's really, really important to come up with your theory or your thesis, your hypothesis, and then test it. And basically, what you're going to do in each instance is you're going to take a look at what the result is, learn from that, and then figure out whether you're going to persevere or you're going to change it and you're going to adapt and pivot. So persevering obviously is going ahead with what you have, and then pivoting is making a change. And it explains all different kinds of pivots in the book. But it basically says the real question always comes down to persevering or pivoting. And the question is the progress you've made so far as to prove your original hypothesis is great, or is a change required? And if you need to make a change, the pivot comes into play, and it allows you to test a new hypothesis. New hypothesis. Oh man, I'm getting tongue tied here. New hypothesis, the same thing, going through a similar process. And we've talked about several examples of this already. So there's
The entire process is repeated over and over again. And he has a diagram in the book that they call the feedback loop. And basically, what it is you start with an idea, and then you build the idea, that becomes your product. You use the product, you measure it, you use with customers, you use that data to then see what went right, what went wrong, and you learn from that data. Once you've learned from the data, you create the next idea, whether that's a pivot or whether that's moving forward with the idea that you already had. And then when you've got that new idea, you start all over again, building the new product, measuring, going through the data, learning. And when you evaluate again, you come up with, again, either a pivot idea or a persevere idea.
Yeah, and this is in the section of the book called steering. And the diagram that you just talked about, I'm sure that you can Google it and have it find it online, but it's called the build, measure, learn, feedback loop. And it's a circle. As you said, ideas is on the top, and then you got a line going into the build, to the product, to the measure, the data, the learn, and then going right back to the idea. And the bottom line is your goal is to minimize the total time going through the loop. Keep going through it again and again and again until you're ready to persevere on that one product that you're looking at, and then you're going to try something else and do it with another thing. So it's a really, really great diagram, and it's very, very simple. It's just 6 circles with arrows running through the circle. Again, the build, measure, learn, feedback loop. I would go online and see if you can grab that, and if you put that in front of yourself, it will really help you when you're feeling stuck.
Yeah, it's the entire process of lean startup. And there are actually now a series of lean books that you can go through that apply this same process once you get past the startup. But one of the most difficult things for entrepreneurs in the lean startup is actually stopping development at the minimum viable product. So many entrepreneurs want to put in that work and want to make that product perfect before they show it to anybody. And you really do have to pull yourself back and go, okay, it's not important that this is perfect because we're going to be changing it. But you need to get that minimal viable product done to get the feedback from your customers. And the customers become an integral part of the business because they are helping to direct the development. And it brings up another decision that the entrepreneur has to make is that, are you going to take the suggestions of the customers? Sometimes yes, sometimes no.
Yeah, and this is a series of different pivots that you talk about. Pivots is just a word for change, but there's several ways to do it. And a couple of them that he starts with is a zoom in pivot and the zoom out pivot. And a zoom in pivot is a situation where there's a single feature of a product that shifts and it becomes the focus of the entire product. It simplifies things for you. Sometimes when the company begins with a broad focus and realizes that the only one single feature is the whole thing, you have to pivot and just focus on that. On the other side of things is to zoom out when you might initially be focusing on just one thing, but realizing it that could just be one part of what could be a much better whole product by doing other things. And it does talk about customer segment pivots, which is analyzing what your customers are saying, tailoring the products and services to them, um, and customer need. There's a whole different uh, bunch of pivots in there. And what he does say is when you are looking at the analytical side of things as to whether to persevere or to adapt and pivot, you should have frequent meetings to go over what you're going to be doing with these different things. This is part of the learning process, is to understanding, or the measuring process. So there's a lot of different ways to do that, and these are all outlined in the book. So
Right. And in addition to the processes, the book also goes into different ways you can measure what's going on to see what you're learning. Is it a viable product? Different things. They talk about actionable metrics, accessible metrics, um, auditable metrics. And it's very important because you have to be able to justify that, yes, you actually did learn how to make it better. So the entire thing with a lean startup is taking action as fast as possible, learning what you can, and then taking actions based on what you've learned, like a shampoo bottle, rinse, repeat. And you just keep doing this over and over again until the business is built. You've got a customer base and you've got a profitable product.
yeah, this is where he talks about in the measurement process using innovation accounting. We've talked about cost accounting in business and so on to analyze cost and profitability and whatever. But innovative accounting is designed especially for startups who are facing progress questions. It's identifying where your baseline is, where your business is currently at, how it's really performing. It's a process of tuning the engine. So it's designed to help you figure out whether you're going to pivot or persevere by examining the data that you've collected, feedback, and so on and so forth, using the different types of methods that we've just been talking about. So instead of numbers, it's basically activity and operations accounting. And it's a really, really great concept as far as measuring and quantifying things and determining what direction you're going to go in as a result of that.
Exactly. All in all, the lean startup, one of the things that it mentions early on is the fact that a startup isn't just a new business. It could be a new department in a business. It could be a new product in an existing corporation. And these methods work for any of those. So it's not just the traditional entrepreneur who can use the lean startup methodology. It's people in existing businesses and large corporations who are trying to push progress forward and see where it goes. Now, we're just about at the end of our time. So, Chip, what do you think is the big takeaway from this book?
Wow, we talked about a lot of things here, but I guess what this is all about is simplifying things. So going back to the build, measure, learn feedback loop, the idea is number one. And then what you're going to do is build your minimum viable product, and you're going to measure it. You're going to look at the data, learn from it, and keep the process going in as little time as possible for each loop that you're working with. So it's just using these steps to guide you. And there's a lot of things in this book that will help you out as far as the details of the how-tos.
Yeah, I think the big takeaway that I got from the lean startup is act quickly, measure what you're doing, learn from what you did, and improve it, and keep that cycle going. And by doing that, you can create fantastic things using fewer resources, much less time, and you get to interact with the end customer so that you know that what you're doing is what they want and what's actually going to be used. So that, in a nutshell, is the lean startup. You've been listening to the Success Showcase. You can catch us every week at xvadio.com/podcasts. You can also find us at the iTunes Store, the Apple Podcasts app, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and wherever you find podcasts. Remember, make this your best week ever and make next week even better. See you then.